Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas, folks, from David Hurley of EasyChessTips.com, your pub chess bluffer. I'm about to take you through a game that I played on Wednesday, the 19th of December 2018, against a private student of mine who is also my regular chess opponent, Dr. M, in which I played white and opened, as usual, with d4. And he countered with d5, so I went in with c4, my usual second move, and out came the knight to f6. Now, I had completely forgotten that this is the martial defense. I studied it a few months ago in my go-to book for the d4 opening, John Watson's excellent strategic chess opening repertoire for white. And in fact, quite early on in the book, in chapter 3, we have the unorthodox Queen's Gambit. And in that chapter on page 42, he mentions the martial gambit, not as one of the main unorthodox openings, but as the first of the, well, actually the only other plausible move apart from the possible unorthodox openings, if you see what I mean. The reason why it's sort of shoved down here into a little aside almost, which just takes up a column and a half of, or nearly 2 columns of analysis, is because, according to John Watson, this defense is considered inferior because it surrenders the center with tempo to white. And we can have a quick look at this and then go back to what I actually did, having completely overlooked that we were entering martial defense territory, which could have been to my benefit. It would have been to my benefit to have remembered, although in the end I should say this game didn't turn out too badly for me at all. But as Lichess is recommending, so does John Watson, that c takes d5 here. Now here there are several possibilities for Black, all of which, according to John Watson, end up with an advantage of some sort for white. But there is one route which white has to play a little carefully, and so that one is just worth having a quick look at here. So one likely option is that Black will take with his knight here. And if this happens, you can see Lichess is recommending an immediate e4 to attack that knight, and that looks natural. But according to John Watson, it can lead to problems. And so, for example, here's what can happen. Black moves the knight back. White brings out the knight. Black now comes down to e5. And there are 2 options here. We'll follow through with this one, the d5 option, and then Black brings out the bishop here. And John Watson gives this the good old exclamation mark, suggesting that Black now has counterplay. Lichess gives Black a small advantage here. Sorry, gives White a small advantage here, but it's practically meaningless at this stage in the game. Black has achieved counterplay with this opening. So what does John Watson recommend instead? If we go back to this situation, he recommends knight to f3, and he refers to it as a finesse. He says this is the only finesse that White needs to know. And here's how it plays out in at least the next couple of moves. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. Common response is bishop to f5, and whereas Lichess is recommending the b knight moves to d2, John Watson recommends queen to b3, having a look at this undefended pawn here. And It's on page 42, the third chapter of a strategic chess opening for a repertoire for white. So if you want to follow through any further, that's the place to look. He says that black has three options, all of which are insufficient. One is knight to c6. One is, these are the fifth moves. One is 5 knight to c6. One is 5 b6. And one is knight to b6. So they are basically knight to c6, knight to b6, or the b6 move. And they all end if white plays well. If white plays the correct moves, they all end in a large advantage for white, according to John Watson. So just keep in mind, if you do the what is considered today the best thing by taking that pawn back at this stage, after black plays knight to f6, white should take that pawn. If black takes back with the knight, instead of playing e4, look at playing a knight to f3. But as I say, I didn't do any of those things because I had completely forgotten that we were in martial territory. In fact, I don't really know what I was thinking at all. Instead of playing what would be my standard third move of knight to c3, I was looking at this early knight coming out here, and I decided to move up my bishop, which is what happened here. And you can see it's given black a little bit of a. Black maintains a bit of an opening advantage through the next few moves, but fritters it away. So I must say I didn't feel under any threat at any moment in this game, and we'll see how it turns out. So also in the early part of the game, we're not really following many of Lichess's recommended moves, but then we get into a position where we are following through with recommended moves more often. Keep in mind, folks, that this is the pub chess bluffer, and I'm playing against an amateur player who switched from shogi a few years ago, and so we're both very much in the learning stages of the game. Let's see. Dr. M responded with e6, and then I brought up my knight. Okay, so we are following some of the recommended moves here. I now went back to, I took, and he took with his pawn, not with his knight. I'm sort of attempting to move back towards Queen's Gambit declined territory, the early opening moves. Yes, I bring that up. Early castle. I bring up the e-pawn. Early castle. Bishop takes f6. Now, this is not what Lichess is recommending. Lichess is recommending this move. I bring that move in a couple of moves later. My idea here is to get rid of the knight defending this pawn structure here. The knight defending this h7 pawn. I want to knock that out. In this kind of situation, I'm really trying to disrupt the defenses in front of the king. And so I'm quite willing to swap off my black bishop to do that, no matter what Lichess may say. That duly happens. And then I ignore that suggestion. And I've got my eyes on this diagonal here. So I bring my bishop out to d3. A pawn chain is strengthened. I then do that queen move, the queen to c2, quite a common trope, I suppose, of the queen's pawn opening. And we see it has that magical effect of loosening the pawn structure in front of the king. I decide now to go all in with a queenside attack. I'm not sure that Lichess likes this very much, but, you know, the pub chess bluffer must do what he must do. And so in we go, get that rook into the middle. Dr. M responds with a queenside attack, but heading for my king, who's cast on the queen side. I must say I wasn't too worried about that because I'm now following my own attack here. bringing out the knight. The bishop comes over here to attempt to pin the knight to the rook. That's all fine. We can just make the bishop go away by moving h3. So the bishop decides to swap off. And I also don't mind this because it opens up for me another route to the king. I'm quite happy to see this route and this route to the Kingside being nicely opened up. What happens here? Two suggested moves, neither of which comes into play. Knight d7. You can see now the advantage is beginning to go my way. And it's at this point where I think I'm following. Oh, not quite yet. I've brought my rook in to get onto that highway to the king. Queen to e8. Queen to e8 looks like a bit of a blunder here. See what happens to the advantage bar. I'm not sure what the idea was behind it. And I just now this is where I begin to follow the recommended moves of light chess, or rather I discover after the game that these moves are not unreasonable. h5 instead of the recommended h4, h5. So the pawn structure in front of the king is now quite loose. And that's what we want. f5 as recommended. He brings his king up, and look what happens there. So the advantage is decisively in my favor at this stage. And yes, I do advance my pawn to f5. The rook comes over, so you can now see what the thinking was behind moving the king, was to get the rook defending that pawn. However, I'm just quite keen to continue working on that pawn structure. So I get in that check, knock out that pawn. And light chess is recommending that the rook takes the pawn. And obviously that is a reasonable move. It's not one that Dr. M considered. He saw pawn takes pawn. And now, yes, my knight is beginning to come into the game, attacking on the king side. He rightly puts his knight back there to add some defense. I bring my knight in. Now, at this stage, we have the crucial move, I think, of the evening, the decisive move. Dr. M spent quite a bit of time thinking about his options here, and he was calculating and counting. Now, bear in mind, we play 30 minutes each with no increments, so time disappears down the plug hole quite quickly in our games. And he spent a few minutes, I'm not sure how many, maybe 3 minutes or so, calculating and counting. And his focus was on this pawn here, the g6 pawn. And he saw that he had shored up the g6 pawn's defense with the rook, the king, the knight, and the queen, against which I had this battery here. So he's counting 1, 2, 3, 4 in defense and 1, 2, 3, 4 in attack. So the position in his mind was secure. It seemed secure. And so he decided to continue with some counterplay, or attempted counterplay, on the queen side. But you immediately see what I had my eyes on. Dr. M, I don't think, calculated this into his thoughts at all. Didn't include this possibility in his thoughts at all. The pawn on h5 is not at all secure, because we have if I take the pawns, I do, this pawn can take, and then the rook takes the rook and the king takes, but we have a nice way in then for the queen and the bishop to come in through to h7, this rook to then bring up the attack as well. So that's what happened. I took with my knight. Of course, I should say, it now becomes obvious that the other thing I was thinking about, which I could completely overlook just now, was that he can't take with this pawn, obviously, because of this battery here pinning the pawn to the king. So it's pretty disastrous to overlook that move. And now the knight has his eyes picked up that free pawn, completely loosened up and broken up the pawns in front of the king, and now has his eye on the bishop. And this is where things really do go pear-shaped for Dr. M's game, because he plays a3, hoping, I guess, to break through on the queen side, but it's a forlorn hope. And anyway, I have time to take I take the bishop with tempo here, and it's it's two disastrous moves in a row, because now we have forked the queen and the king. So the king comes over, the queen goes, the king comes over, because it's another check. It's taking the queen with tempo. The king comes over. He doesn't take with the rook here, presumably not wanting to lose this pawn, having marched it down the board. The king comes over. We get in another check. The king comes over, and I don't bother with that pawn that Lichess is recommending. I come over here and get in another check. This pawn could take the knight, but then the rook goes down, so I don't do that. The king comes up here, and I take a move just to prevent any disasters on my side happening. You never know in our games, so I just shore up my queen side like so, or secure my queen side. I think I've got time. Lichess has given me this massive advantage here. I also had a time advantage on my clock, so I don't need to rush around trying to find the ideal move. He moves back. I faff around a bit like so, but it's all in the process of bringing more pieces into the attack. Check, and yep, I do take that. I take the last remaining kingside pawn. He brings his rook over. I bring in the queen. So now we have 3 pieces massing for an attack. Brings in some defense. Trying to find a better square for the bits for the knight, bring the knight back into contention. This opens things up for the knight. So we get the queen in here. The knight comes in. The knight comes in. The king moves. And now the knight is pinned to the king. He moves again, so we get in the check, and it's pretty much curtains at this stage. So yeah, Lichess has started giving me checkmate in a number of moves. 10 moves ahead. Well, I was only seeing 1 or 2 moves ahead. So I just moved the queen up here for a check. The king comes down. It's checkmate in 9. But I'm in no hurry. So yeah, checkmate in 9, but you know, I can just poodle down here, put that move in, and I didn't hit the pawn. Perhaps I should have done there. That probably would have been better, but again, I'm in no hurry. So, sorry, with this situation, I do indeed bring the queen down here. The queen is now protected by the rook. Now, this is the fatal error. The king moves back, and so here it's checkmate. Okay, folks, that's all from me, David Hurley, the pub chess bluffer who resides at easychesstips.com. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.